The first time she said the words out loud, she was only 15, standing barefoot behind her mother's kitchen door, while laughter floated in from the front room. "No one will ever choose a fat woman as his bride," she whispered to the flour-dusted wood, testing how truth tasted. It tasted bitter. It tasted final. 10 years later, at 25, she stood on the cracked platform of the railway station, with a basket of freshly pressed shirts balanced against her hip, and the same sentence pressed heavier than the load she carried. The afternoon wind dragged coal smoke across the sky, staining it gray. Steam hissed from the waiting engine, shrill and impatient. Two well-dressed women stood a few feet away beneath parasols, studying her as if she were a cautionary tale stitched into flesh. "She's strong enough to wash half the town's clothes," one murmured, not softly enough. "But strong isn't what men look for," the other replied, her eyes flicking to the curve of the washerwoman's waist. "No man wants a bride who takes up more space than his pride." They laughed, a sound like china clinking together. The washerwoman kept her chin level. Years of practice had trained her face into polite vacancy. She adjusted the basket and focused on the rhythm of her breathing. Inhale, steady. Exhale, smaller. She had learned to make herself smaller in every way that did not involve her body. Her name rarely mattered to anyone. In town she was simply the washerwoman. She rose before dawn, hauled water from the pump behind her rented room, and scrubbed other people's lives clean, while her own felt permanently stained. Soap gnawed at her knuckles until they cracked and bled. Lye bit into her skin. Winter stiffened her joints. Summer baked her beneath a merciless sun. Still, she worked, because work was the one thing that did not look at her with judgment. Her parents had once looked at her with something close to hope. That hope dimmed as her younger sister bloomed delicate and slender, drawing suitors like bees to clover. The house had filled with flowers and laughter for her sister, while the washerwoman remained in the kitchen, pressing hems and pretending not to hear comparisons. "She has a good heart," her mother would say, as if compensating for a flaw too large to name. "A good heart doesn't lighten the load," her father once answered, low and tired. He did not mean cruelty, he meant survival. Dowries cost money. Weddings required invitations. Feeding an unmarried daughter year after year felt like pouring grain into a sack with no bottom. When her sister married and left, the house grew quieter, then colder. Bills stacked up. Her father's cough worsened. One evening, her parents sat her down at the scarred wooden table and spoke gently of opportunity in another town, of relatives willing to help them start anew. They spoke of her independence as if it were a gift. She understood what they could not say. They were choosing a lighter future. She helped them pack. When the wagon rolled away at dawn, she stood in the road long after the dust settled. No one turned back. Since then, she had rented a single room above the baker's shop, and paid for it with the strength of her arms. She washed linens for the wealthiest families, pressing lace and silk with meticulous care. She memorized the shape of other women's waists through the garments she ironed flat. She learned the scent of perfume she would never afford. At church, she sat near the back. Children stared openly. Mothers nudged them to look away. Eligible men glanced once, then shifted their attention elsewhere, as if guided by instinct. She told herself she did not mind. Desire, after all, was a luxury item. The station had become her busiest delivery point. Ranchers and merchants passed through weekly, their trunks stuffed with starched collars and monogrammed cuffs she had prepared. She liked the station's noise, it drowned out thought. Today, however, the murmurs seemed sharpened. "Poor thing!" one of the parasol women sighed, watching her with theatrical pity. "She works so hard. But what's the use? No man will claim her." The washerwoman's grip tightened on the basket handle, until the woven reeds creaked. She felt the familiar ache rising behind her ribs, a blend of humiliation and defiance. She had told herself long ago not to hope, yet something stubborn refused to die entirely. It flickered when she saw couples walking arm in arm, when she watched brides step carefully into carriages, when she imagined, for a reckless second, what it might feel like to be chosen in front of witnesses. A whistle split the air. The train shuddered to a halt, metal shrieking against metal. Doors swung open. Boots hit the platform. The crowd shifted with renewed energy. She focused on her list, matching names to parcels, determined to move quickly and disappear. Then she noticed the hush. It was subtle at first, a thinning of chatter near the center of the platform. Heads turned. A tall man stepped down from the first-class carriage, sunlight catching the dark sweep of his hair. His coat was cut from fine cloth, his boots polished, his posture unhurried and assured. Recognition rippled outward. Even the station master straightened. "That's the young rancher," someone whispered. "Owns more land than half the county." The parasol women adjusted their hats instantly, laughter melting into flirtatious smiles. The washerwoman lowered her eyes, expecting him to stride past as men like him always did, toward slimmer silhouettes and brighter ribbons. She shifted her weight, preparing to retreat before her presence could stain the scene. But the rhythm of approaching footsteps slowed directly in front of her. She sensed it before she saw it, the shadow falling across her basket, the pause heavy with intention. Against her will, she lifted her gaze. He was looking at her. Not through her. At her. And in his eyes was not mockery, not pity, not polite avoidance. It was recognition. For a suspended second, the noise of the station dissolved into the hiss of steam and the thud of her pulse. The rancher's gaze did not flinch or slide past her shoulder in search of someone more suitable. It remained steady, curious rather than cruel. She felt exposed, as if every unkind word ever spoken about her had been written plainly across her dress. "You dropped this," he said, his voice low and even. He held out a white handkerchief, finely stitched at the corner with his initials. She recognized it immediately. She had washed and pressed it that morning. It must have slipped from the folded stack when she adjusted her basket. "I was coming to return it to you," she answered, though that was not entirely true. Her instinct had been to send it through the station clerk, avoiding any direct encounter. He did not smile in amusement or condescension. He studied her hands instead, the cracked skin and faint redness left by lye. "You're the one who does the washing for the North Ranch," he said. "Yes, sir." "Then I owe you thanks. My shirts have never held a crease so well." The compliment unsettled her more than an insult would have. Praise felt like a trick, a bright cloth thrown over a trap. Around them, she sensed attention sharpening. The two parasol women had fallen conspicuously silent. "It's my work," she replied carefully. "Nothing more." "Work done well is never nothing," he said. He did not rush away after retrieving his handkerchief. Instead, he asked her name. No one at the station had asked it in months. When she told him, he repeated it, as if testing its weight, ensuring he would not forget it. The station master cleared his throat pointedly, reminding the rancher of luggage waiting to be claimed. At last, he inclined his head to her. "I'll see you next week," he said, as though it were a natural arrangement between equals. She watched him walk away, every step confident without arrogance. The crowd's murmur resumed, but it had shifted in tone. It was no longer dismissal. It was speculation. That evening, she replayed the encounter while scrubbing a stubborn stain from a silk cuff. She told herself it had been nothing more than courtesy. Wealthy men were taught manners the way she had been taught endurance. Yet his eyes had held no flicker of embarrassment at being seen speaking with her. When he returned the following week, she nearly convinced herself she had imagined the first exchange. But he stepped down from the train and sought her out immediately, bypassing the cluster of smiling women arranged like a bouquet at the platform's edge. "I hope the water was kinder to you this week," he said. She blinked. "The water? You look as though it rarely is." The observation carried no mockery, only concern. She shrugged. "Water does what it must. So do I." He nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds lonely." Lonely. The word pressed into her ribs with surprising force. She busied herself with handing him a wrapped parcel of freshly laundered shirts. He paid her, adding an extra coin to the stack. "You've overcounted," she said at once, trying to return it. "I haven't," he replied. "Precision deserves reward." "I charge the same as the others," she insisted. "I won't have people saying I take advantage." His gaze sharpened slightly. "Do people say much about you?" She hesitated. Honesty felt dangerous. People always say something. He did not ask her to elaborate. Instead, he spoke of the ranch, of long days mending fences, of cattle lost in last month's storm, of the quiet that settled over open fields at dusk. He described it without boasting, as though he were offering her a window rather than a performance. She found herself listening despite her caution. No one had ever shared the texture of their days with her before. Conversation usually ended at transactions. By the third week, gossip had ripened into open commentary. As he spoke with her, she heard a whisper float across the platform. He could have any girl in the county. Perhaps he's charitable. Or bored. Heat crawled up her neck. She lowered her voice. You shouldn't linger. It gives people reason to talk. Let them, he said simply. You don't understand. Her composure cracked, revealing the raw edge beneath. They will say I trapped you. That I mistook kindness for invitation. And have you? He asked quietly. The question startled her into silence. She searched his expression for signs of cruelty, disguised as curiosity. She found none. Only patience. I know my place, she said at last, though the words tasted of surrender. He regarded her for a long moment. Do you? The train whistle blew again, signaling departure. He stepped back but did not retreat entirely. I'll need you at the station this Saturday, he said. Not for laundry. Her stomach tightened. For what then? For a conversation that deserves more than passing glances. She almost refused. The safer path was distance, invisibility restored. Yet something in his tone carried weight, as though he were building toward a structure neither of them could yet see. All right, she heard herself say. That night, alone in her narrow room above the bakery, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her reflection in the small mirror nailed to the wall. The glass warped her features, broadening what was already broad, softening what was already soft. She imagined standing beside him under the open scrutiny of the town. The image felt absurd, almost laughable. No one will ever choose a fat woman as his bride, she had once declared with certainty. Saturday was 3 days away. For the first time in years, certainty began to tremble. Saturday arrived bright and merciless, sunlight laying every flaw bare. She almost did not go. Twice she untied her bonnet ribbons, deciding she would claim illness, or work, or simple forgetfulness. But something steadier than fear pulled her toward the station, the same place where she had learned to stand unseen. The platform was more crowded than usual. Word traveled quickly in small towns, and curiosity required little invitation. She felt it in the air, a tightness, a collective anticipation disguised as casual errands. Women clustered in deliberate groups. Men leaned against crates with folded arms. Even the station master had polished his spectacles. Her steps slowed when she recognized two familiar figures near the ticket window. Her parents stood side by side, older than she remembered, her father thinner, her mother's shoulders stooped. They had returned to town on business, someone whispered. They had not sent word to her. Her mother's eyes flicked toward her and then away, as if contact might reopen an old wound. Her father shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Shame moved through her like a current, sharp and old. Of all days for them to witness this. She chose a place near the freight barrels, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore her plainest dress, freshly washed but modest, as though humility could shield her from spectacle. Every whisper felt amplified. Does she truly believe he meant something by it? Men like that don't marry women like her. Perhaps he will announce a business arrangement. She kept her gaze fixed on the tracks. The rails gleamed under the sun, twin lines stretching toward a horizon that had never once bent in her favor. The train's whistle pierced the heat. Steam rolled forward, dramatic and blinding. As the engine slowed, the murmurs thickened. Her heart beat so loudly she feared others could hear it. He stepped down from the carriage with the same measured confidence she had come to expect. His coat was dark, his boots dusted from travel, his expression composed but intent. He scanned the platform only briefly before finding her. Relief flickered across his face when he did. He did not approach her at once. Instead, He turned to the station master and exchanged a few quiet words. The delay tightened the knot in her stomach. Perhaps she had misunderstood everything. Perhaps this was to be a polite farewell before he chose someone more fitting. Then he moved toward her, not hurriedly, not theatrically, but with unmistakable purpose. "You came," he said, as though he had doubted she would. "You asked me to," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I did." He glanced around at the crowd, fully aware of the attention. "And I am glad you did." Her parents watched openly now. Her mother's fingers twisted in her shawl. "You should not make this harder than it already is," she whispered to him, panic threading her words. "They are waiting for you to correct yourself." "Correct myself?" he echoed. "To remember what you are," she said. "And what I am." His gaze did not waver. "I know exactly what you are." The statement silenced her more effectively than any insult. The crowd leaned closer, sensing a shift. He took a single step forward, enough that they stood nearly toe-to-toe. "I have spent weeks considering whether to speak privately," he said, raising his voice just enough to carry. "But silence breeds doubt, and I have none." A hush fell, thick and complete. "I have met many women," he continued. "Women praised for beauty, for grace, for delicate manners. I have shared tables and dances and polite conversation. Yet none have shown me what you have." A ripple of disbelief traveled through the onlookers. "You rise before dawn," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You labor until your hands bleed. You endure cruelty without surrendering your kindness. You stand alone and still stand upright. That is strength I recognize." Her throat tightened painfully. No one had ever named her endurance as virtue. Behind her, she heard her father exhale sharply. "I do not seek a bride to decorate my home," he said. "I seek a partner to build a life." He reached into his coat pocket. The smallest movement sent a collective gasp across the platform. He withdrew a simple ring, gold catching the sun. Her vision blurred. "I am not blind to what they see when they look at you," he said, voice steady. "They see size. They see difference. I see courage. I see loyalty. I see a woman who has been told she is unworthy and has survived anyway." He lowered himself to one knee on the hard wooden planks of the station. The sound that escaped the crowd was not laughter but stunned silence. Her mother covered her mouth. One of the parasol women turned pale. He held the ring up between them. "Will you marry me?" he asked clearly. "Will you stand beside me not because you were chosen by chance, but because I choose you deliberately?" Time fractured. She felt every insult she had swallowed. Every night she had stared into a warped mirror and rehearsed resignation. She felt the weight of her parents' departure, the loneliness of rented rooms, the certainty she had once spoken like a curse. No one will ever choose a fat woman as his bride. Her first instinct was disbelief. "Why?" she managed, the word trembling. "Because I see you," he answered. The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and unrestrained. The crowd waited, breath suspended. She looked at her parents. Regret carved deep lines into her mother's face. Her father's eyes shone with something like apology. But their approval no longer determined her worth. She turned back to the man kneeling before her. "Yes," she said, the word quiet but unwavering. The platform erupted, not in ridicule, but in astonished murmurs that struggled to find footing. He rose and slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady, as though this moment required no defense. For the first time in her life, she did not feel the need to shrink. And as he lifted her hand for all to see, the town understood that the woman no one had chosen had just been chosen in front of everyone. In the days that followed, the town rearranged its story to protect itself. Some claimed they had always known the rancher possessed unconventional tastes. Others insisted the washerwoman must have secured his affection through quiet manipulation. The truth, that he had chosen her openly and without apology, sat uneasily in mouths accustomed to easier explanations. She felt the shift immediately. Where once there had been dismissive glances, now there were measuring ones. Women who had never spoken to her approached with thin smiles and cautious congratulations. Men who had ignored her nodded stiffly, as though acknowledging a promotion. None of it resembled warmth. It resembled recalculation. He did not waver beneath it. Each time he stepped onto the platform or into a shop, he offered his arm without hesitation. He introduced her by name, not by occupation. "This is the woman I am going to marry," he would say, voice level and proud. The phrasing struck like a bell, clear and impossible to mishear. Her parents requested a meeting before the wedding. They came to her rented room above the bakery, removing their hats with awkward hands. The small space felt even smaller with the weight of their regret pressing against the walls. "We were wrong," her mother said, tears already bright in her eyes. "We thought we were sparing you hardship." "You were sparing yourselves," she answered, not cruelly but plainly. The words had waited years for air. Her father bowed his head. "We were afraid no one would carry you into a future." She looked down at the ring on her finger, simple and unadorned, yet heavier than gold had any right to be. "I learned to carry myself," she said. "That is what you should have taught me." Silence settled between them, thick with truths that could not be undone. At last, she reached forward and took her mother's trembling hand. Forgiveness did not erase abandonment, but it loosened its grip. She would not step into marriage dragging bitterness behind her like a torn hem. The wedding was held beneath a wide stretch of sky on the ranch itself. There were no elaborate decorations, no orchestra, no parade of finery. The land was vast and open, grass bending in the wind as if bowing in quiet witness. Workers from the ranch stood alongside townsfolk, curiosity mingling with genuine affection. She wore a dress she had sewn herself from sturdy cream fabric, its lines simple and honest. It did not attempt to disguise her shape, it honored it. When she walked toward him across the sunlit field, she felt every eye upon her, but the scrutiny no longer pierced. It skimmed harmlessly across a surface she had finally claimed as her own. He waited at the front, hat removed, expression steady yet unmistakably moved. When she reached him, he did not lower his voice for intimacy or raise it for performance. He spoke so all could hear. "I choose you today as I did at the station," he said. "Not in defiance of this town, but in declaration of what I know to be true." She felt her pulse in her fingertips, in her throat, in the fragile space between doubt and belief. When it was her turn to speak, she did not recite rehearsed phrases. She spoke plainly. "I was taught that love is reserved for certain shapes, certain faces, certain kinds of women," she said. "I believed it. I carried that belief like a chain. You did not break it for me. You showed me I could break it myself." A murmur moved through the guests, softer this time, contemplative rather than cruel. They exchanged vows without ornament, promising partnership rather than perfection. When he kissed her, it was not tentative. It was assured, a seal pressed firmly against years of whispered doubt. Life on the ranch demanded adaptation. She traded soap barrels for ledgers, learning the rhythm of accounts and harvest schedules. She organized supplies, ensured workers were fed generously, and listened when they spoke of concerns. Strength that had once been confined to washboards found new purpose in stewardship. There were still whispers, of course. Change rarely silenced prejudice completely. Yet each season that passed without scandal, each year that revealed steady prosperity under their shared management, dulled the town's skepticism. Respect crept in where ridicule once flourished. One afternoon, months after the wedding, she returned to the station to oversee a shipment of fabric. The platform felt different beneath her feet, though it was the same worn wood. A young girl stood near the edge, shoulders hunched, staring at her reflection in the train's polished side. "No one will ever choose someone like me," the girl muttered, unaware she had spoken aloud. The words struck with eerie familiarity. She knelt beside the child, recognizing the familiar slump of self-protection. "Someone might," she said gently. "But more important is that you choose yourself first." The girl blinked, uncertain. Before she could say more, the train whistle shrieked. Steam surged forward, dramatic and blinding, just as it had on the day her life had shifted. Through the haze, she saw her husband stepping down from the carriage after a brief trip to purchase breeding stock. He scanned the platform only a moment before finding her. Relief and pride lit his face in equal measure. He crossed the distance quickly and took her hand without hesitation, fingers interlacing with natural certainty. The gesture was small, but deliberate enough that anyone watching understood it was habit, not display. As the steam thinned and the town resumed its hum, she felt the past loosen its final hold. She was no longer the girl no one chose. She was the woman who had been chosen publicly, defiantly, and who had chosen in return. And as he led her toward the waiting wagon beneath a sky wide with promise, she realized the greatest thrill was not that he had silenced the crowd. It was that she no longer needed the crowd to be silent at all.